Hi everyone, and welcome to the first ever episode of the UCU podcast. My name's Nathan Gayle, I'm UCU's press officer, and I'm also your host today. There can surely be no more important point to start on than as we have reached a point in negotiations where employers in both disputes have put forward proposals to settle both UCU and UUK, a hugely significant moment. Of course, we now have to move through the union's democratic procedures, including ultimately a members' vote on the proposals. But we wanted to use this podcast to firstly inform you before you cast your vote in the informal e-ballot which opened today. Second, give you as much information on the agreement as possible. And third, let you hear from the union's most senior officials. I also want to say that alongside this podcast, there will be a transcript available for members who prefer written communications. We'll also be producing bite-sized chunks, clips of this broadcast, as well as video message, something for all members. With me today, we have our General Secretary, Jo Grady. Hi, Jo.
Hello.
We also have President-elect and Chair of the Higher Education Committee, Justine Mercer. Hi, Justine.
Hello.
And we have UCU Head of Bargaining, Organising and Representation, Greg Barnett. Hi, Greg.
Hi there.
All three of our guests were involved in the negotiations, and our plan today is to let the General Secretary set out the whole proposal, but then we want to dig a bit deeper. We want to ask the questions that you'll be asking. Is it enough? Could we have got more by striking? Was it the right call to pause the dispute? Can we trust the employers? Were the talks serious? We'll go through each aspect of the agreement. We'll get into all of that, but before we do, Jo, can I ask you to set the scene in detail? What has been agreed? Is this a victory for UCU members?
Thanks, Nathan, and hi, everyone. There is a lot to cover across both disputes, so I'm going to answer your question, but I probably need people to bear with me because I want to give people as much detail as possible. So let's start with USS. Now, as anyone who has been in UCU for a while will know, this is not our first USS pensions dispute. In fact, our union has been in disputes about USS repeatedly since 2011, taking action in 2011, 2014, 2018, most recently in 2019 to 2020, and again last year in 2022. These disputes have been prompted by valuations of USS, which have to occur in the UK every 3 years by law. This culminated most recently in what was a 35% cut to the future guaranteed bit of our pensions. And you'll remember this happened in April 2022. A cut that we argued at the time was avoidable, but a cut that was imposed nonetheless, and that was completely due to what was a misjudged valuation conducted during the COVID pandemic. All of these disputes have been characterised by one consistent theme, and that is our employers insisting that cuts to the value of our pension are required, and us arguing that this is unnecessary. Until now, this dispute differs, and it differs in one significant way. Our employers are no longer disagreeing with us about that fundamental fact. Our employers are not, in this moment, arguing for a cut to our pension. In fact, they are actually in agreement with us on the following things. And these are the things that we have put forward as a proposal to help us resolve our dispute with them. So these things are restoring the cut in the value of your pension that took place in April in 2022. Reducing contributions that, as you know, have risen significantly over the last few years and led to the pension becoming increasingly unaffordable for lower paid staff to remain in it. Agreement on the accrual rate, on the salary cap, inflation protection, but also, and I think this is going to be really important to anyone listening who has been in those USS disputes for all these years, a commitment to jointly work together to ensure the long-term sustainability of the scheme, avoiding what have become triennial disputes. Now, all of this will not happen overnight. Unfortunately, they can't, but they can happen as quickly as changes to pensions permit. And in the UK, this means that this would be provisionally signed off in September. This is when final costings would be presented to the Joint Negotiating Committee prior to cuts being restored in April 2024 and contributions being lowered then too. Now, we won't know exactly what that lowered contribution rate will be, but we anticipate that the member rate will be somewhere between 8% to 9.6%. And we anticipate the pension value being restored as closely as possible to what was cut last April. Again, the exact figure, it may differ slightly, but this will simply be because of what is delivered by the valuation. But the intention of both parties and agreed at the JNC is that a priority is to take members back to the type of pension that they had prior to the cut. Now, this is, by any margin, a big deal for us as a union. It is a significant victory because what it represents is the reversal of something that no other union has managed to get back for their members. A reversal of a cut to the pension that we knew wasn't necessary. For our members, for anyone listening who's been involved, this is because of your hard work. It has been a really long road since 2011 to get here, but it is the determination of UCU members that's delivered us right here. Other things are on our side too. The interim financial data that we've had from USS demonstrates that these things can happen, but it's not secured at all until we get there. And it's you, your union, balloting differently, taking action differently, negotiating differently, and reballoting differently that's actually got us to this place. For now, I believe that the proposals that we've had from employers in USS is going to be enough for us to stand down action. And for the moment, unless we are given good cause, withdraw threats of future action. We still need, and this is really important for everybody listening, we still need to deliver a huge result in the reballot. Because, let's be honest, our employers, they do change their mind. They have changed their minds in the past, and we can't simply trust for them to stand by the things that they say. So we really need to make sure that we have an active strike mandate and the threat of strike action to deploy if we require it. But my assessment right now is that until we have the costings in September, we can get off picket lines. That doesn't mean we would stand down action short of a strike until we, vote on any agreement, but we can get back to the jobs that we enjoy, and we can hopefully look forward to a restored pension. The ballot result, the strike action, the pause, the intensive negotiations, more importantly, your determination, that has got us to this place. Valuation pending, we should be seeing the pension restored. The only thing really at this point which could change this valuation would be a severe economic shock. And I guess, the Tories, they could trigger, if they tried, another mini budget. But for now, we, and most importantly, you, have done everything that you can to get your pension back. So I'm going to leave talking about pensions there for a moment, though I'm sure we're going to return to it. And I'm just going to talk about the pay dispute that we have with UCU. This is complicated, so I am going to need people to bear with me. Unlike the USS dispute, we have more employers, significantly more employers in the pay dispute, and also more unions. So in pensions, it is just us and the employer UUK representing around 65 employers, whereas in the pay dispute, we negotiate with 4 of the unions and 1 employer body, UCU, and they represent over 150 institutions. This really complicates matters. And that's before we get to the point that our pay dispute is also essentially 4 disputes. It is a pay dispute, a dispute about casualisation, a workload dispute, and of course, a dispute about pay inequality. Again, UCU members who have been in the union for a while will recall that we have been in dispute about these issues for some time, with the employer really refusing to meaningfully negotiate with us on the 3 non-pay issues of our dispute, or really getting to a point where we felt that we were getting somewhere. So casualisation, workload and equality pay gaps, central to UCU members, not something we've managed to get agreements on before. Now, in the time that we've got, I'm going to report on the proposals on the table from our employer. And crucially, it does involve movement on all 3 of these issues. Specifically, it involves UCU acknowledging agreeing and committing to negotiate with us new standards, hopefully in some cases new frameworks, new model agreements and principles across all three non-pay related issues. And I right now am going to talk you through all three of them, and I am going to start with casualisation. So depending on where people who are listening to this work in the UK, you will know that there has been some significant progress locally because of negotiations by UCU branches and staff. Many will know about the recent successes we've had at the Open University, where 4,800 staff were moved onto permanent contracts. We've seen recent progress at Bath, transferring 286 individuals this year and 181 over to more secure forms of employment next year. And just really recently at Sheffield Hallam, we've seen the university pledge to stop using zero-hour contracts for lecturing staff, of which there were previously 440. This dispute has always been about moving the employer into a situation where they acknowledge that this is a problem that must be tackled and negotiated nationally as well as locally. So we want to deliver the agreements that we've seen at Bath, at the OU and at Hallam, elsewhere and everywhere. So our employers, yes, they've already acknowledged that the use of zero-hour contracts in any scenario where they are not the choice of the staff member involved must be phased out. The employer has agreed to consult the sector with a strong recommendation to confirm that this will be implemented, and that it will be implemented from August 2023 onwards. So this means in all those institutions where hundreds of lecturing staff are being kept on zero-hour contracts, this will be over. And of course, this process will be subject to a review. So this is an incredible achievement. It's the product, as I've said so many times, of unwavering commitment from UCU members to fixing the issue of spiralling insecurity on campus. But we also consider it an important down payment. A down payment on the broader work that we have agreed to do with the employers. And I'm going to say a little bit about that now. At ACAS, along with our sister campus unions, the GMB, Unite, Unison and EIS, we have signed off several terms of reference for what negotiations on the three non-pay issues in forfeights will include. And on casualisation, we have agreed that principles that will frame our negotiation of local agreements will cover graduate teaching assistants, fixed term contracts, postgraduate researchers, hourly paid contracts. This will also include a review process to monitor progress in reducing casualised contracts with guidance and examples of success promoted across the sector. There are also recommendations for equality impact assessments so that mitigating actions can be taken to address any issues identified around differing contract types. Crucially, these negotiations will conclude by February 2024 at the very latest, with new agreements, with new principles and what have you from the negotiations to be implemented thereafter. Now, we know this is going to involve local UCU branches working hard to get things implemented, as our branches always do. If we're in a position to settle this dispute and move into those intensive negotiations, we intend to put the resource that has been put on this intensive ballot campaigning right into supporting our branches to organise, to build, to recruit, and to negotiate these things locally. We're going to accelerate the process that's been taking part not just at the Open University in Bath and Hallam, but loads of other places as well, and ensure that every branch is going to be supported come February 2024 to be ready to undertake that work locally and to make sure that what we get signed off nationally gets embedded locally. So, will we end casualisation tomorrow? No. But we will end zero-hour contracts by August, and by summer 2024, every single UCU branch in every single university in the UK will be ensuring their university is honouring what we have negotiated at a UK level. We also know that workload, another key part of the forfeights, is an issue for many UCU members, whether that is insufficient time to do tasks, the fact that your work isn't valued by the workload model, maybe you don't have a workload model, or simply the fact that there is too much work to do and you frequently find yourself doing it every weekend. Well, the same approach that we have agreed on casualisation has also been established for dealing with workload. So again, along with our sister campus unions, we've agreed terms of reference for time-limited negotiations on workload to be concluded alongside negotiations on casualisation, and that is no later than February 2024.
Sorry, Jo, can you just go over exactly what those terms of reference will include?
Yeah. So those terms of reference will include agreeing clear guidance for universities and good practice in relation to workload management, reduction of work-related stress, to enable development of local agreements and action plans to reduce excessive workloads and work-related stress or ill health. Negotiating a set of principles nationally that will really seek to set the standard for how we manage workloads as a whole, but that does importantly really relate back in a tangible way, to the day-to-day realities of our jobs. That is not going to be a simple thing. But we do want to be in a position by spring next year to be making sure that we are giving branches the tools that they need to get the particular change that they need locally. As I say, that is going to differ from branches that don't even have a local agreement and a workload model now to branches that are quite far down the path. But there will be something there alongside casualisation in February 2024. Likewise, and I'm getting to the end of this now, everyone listening, don't worry, but it is a long answer. On pay gaps, we've signed off a set of terms of reference with our sister campus unions that not only puts this firmly on the negotiating table, but also offers forward a meaningful way to address the issue. If we settle this dispute, then negotiations will begin immediately and are due to conclude in October 2024 on equality pay gaps. From my perspective, there can be no greater task than working to close gender, ethnicity and disability pay gaps. And before you ask Nathan, the terms of reference include collection and review of available data on pay gaps across the sector, including consideration of intersectional aspects of gender, ethnicity and disability pay gaps, recommended benchmarking across the sector for data, agreed principles and standards for action plans to address pay gaps based upon good practice, recommended timetabled equal pay audits with data shared with recognised trade unions, and involvement of trade unions in action planning developed and implemented locally, and I think this is the one that people are going to be interested in, monitoring progress on those pay gaps, including the higher education institutions that are making progress. But, and I think this is, an important first step before these negotiations even get underway, UCU, I know, is going to be recommending to its members, with a positive recommendation to take meaningful action now to reduce these gaps at a sector as well as a local level. With UCU working with higher education institutions and trade unions to agree principles with which employers can develop local plans involving their local trade unions. These plans will then be underpinned by, the detailed work that I've just suggested will commence following negotiations starting. So, much like zero-hour contracts, this is a powerful and upfront indicator of progress. No longer are we going to have a sector that says all of these issues just have to be dealt with locally. Or indeed, an issue that employers will say, well, we'll address at our own timescale, at our leisure. We're going to be leading the UK, showing other sectors that this is how you correct pay. This is how you reduce inequalities, reduce burnout workloads and turn the tide on insecurity. And we're going to start by immediately eradicating the worst form of that, zero-hour contracts, transferring people onto proper contracts, allowing them to live and work with dignity, which is, what so many of our members say they want. And I'll end with this really on this moment is we are here right now because of UCU members taking impressive action, because UCU members are dedicated to their colleagues and to their sector, and crucially, because we've been able to have these intensive negotiations, because members got behind the pause, have got behind the e-ballot to bring pressure. There wouldn't have been the movement that we've got right now without those different things in play. I said I was finished, but there's actually one final thing I need to cover, and that is pay and a review of the pay spine. We all know that employers have begun taking steps to implement the first tranche of the pay offer that they made. Now, for clarity, for anyone listening, that pay offer is an uplift of 8% for all staff earning up to £19,333, which is spine points 3 to 5, 7% for staff that are spine points 15 to 25, so that's £22,622. All staff earning £30,502 will receive, or less, will receive an uplift of 6%, and all staff earning between £31,411 and £65,578, uplift of 5%. What we're seeing from employers is for a percentage of that to be paid up front from February onwards, from 2% to be paid from March, and the remaining uplift to be paid in August. The union remains, as does the 4 other campus unions in dispute, that this is not enough. The substance of what employers are offering on pay, you will see, has not changed significantly during these negotiations. There's no point in trying to dance around that. We have managed to push them to prioritise the lowest paid on pay, but there's no dressing it up. UCU have remained steadfast that they cannot and will not move on pay. We've continued to argue that employers should increase this. UCU have maintained that to do so would put some institutions in a precarious financial position. Now, as a union, we know that the sector has money. We also know that the sector is in an aggressive competition with each other to hoover up and stockpile students, and in some cases, have been leaving other institutions with insufficient amounts of students, and in doing so, money. There is a long overdue national conversation to be had about the reintroduction of student number caps, something, for what it's worth, I firmly believe should happen, and which may or may not happen at our Congress in May. But regardless of this debate, which I do think is firmly related to money in the sector, UCU haven't improved their offer. What the union has been successfully negotiating, however, is a review of the pay spine, which we believe will result in pay being improved across the board in due course, and in the immediate case, the improvement in pay for those on the lowest 2 spine points, which are now being removed. In addition, negotiations will aim to reach agreement on ways of improving pay compression that's developed through the pay spine, and identifying and addressing reasons for pay compression so they can be avoided in the future, and to model potential changes and agree a new pay spine proposal. So a lot has been happening, a lot of movement across the 3 issues that we really wanted to see movement on. No real movement on pay, but movement on the pay spine.
Cool. Thank you, Jo. And that's incredibly detailed. I'll try and give you a bit of a breather now and move over to Justine. Justine, you've been in the ACAS negotiations alongside colleagues in other unions. You've been involved in other negotiations too at local levels. How have these differed? Have these felt more serious? And do you believe that members' actions have won the concessions that we've got here?
Thanks very much for that, Nathan. So the first thing to say is around involvement in ACAS. I'm the chair of HEC. I've led the higher education negotiations for both pay and pensions since I was elected in autumn 2020. And that's why I was in the ACAS process. But I want to say right at the outset to pay tribute to all of our elected negotiators, not just in this negotiating round, but in all of the previous ones, and to all of our members who took part in strike action, not just this year, but also in previous years. Their resilience and determination have brought us to this point. And you asked, Nathan, whether they were more serious. I wouldn't say they were more serious. They've always been serious. All of our negotiations have been. But I think it's fair to say that the employers have been serious about trying to make progress with us in a way that I haven't quite recognised before. I think it's accurate to say that a combination of us running the ballot differently and taking action in a different way, alongside with the approach by ACAS to move negotiations forward in a different environment, has changed the game. And I do want to pay tribute to the ACAS facilitators. It's also fair to say that other factors have done this too. And I'm going to mention 3, which are briefly the reballot, the size of the negotiating team, and the speed of progress. Regarding the reballot, the fact that we're not just involved in action, but also a reballot has definitely impacted on the employers. And be in no doubt, we need to smash that reballot. The second thing is around size. So at Jinches, the joint trade union side is bigger. Typically, there are 16 people on our side. When you've got 5 unions and 1 employer, you can imagine that these meetings are big and unwieldy. The last thing is around speed of progress. Now, there's no denying that we have been making progress on the pay-related issues at ACAS in a way that really I don't think happened at Jinches. It might seem like the progress we're making is very slow and we're arguing over every single word, but actually, I think the ACAS talks are delivering results faster than the new Jinches process did, which is not to say it's fast, simply that it's not glacial.
Great, thank you, Justine. Greg, if I can come to you, a huge issue for our members listening to this will be trust. We're asking the very same people who introduced insecurity into the sector to remove it. How can we trust them to do that?
Thanks, Nathan. Well, the simple answer is we can't, straightforwardly. We can't just trust the employer's side to automatically deliver what we want them to and what we're asking them to. That said, though, it's negotiation with the employers is the only way out of this dispute. All disputes end that way. They all end through talking, no matter how much has preceded that talking. And we aren't asking them to do things and then simply sitting back and hoping that they do them. Take, for example, the issue of 0 hours contracts. Subject to us settling this dispute, the agreement will be there that there will be no more involuntary 0 hours contracts from August this year onwards. And we will have a review process built into this. In the case of casualisation, equality pay gaps and workload, we will start the time-limited negotiations as soon as possible. And we've already agreed a tight and deliverable set of terms of reference, as Jo outlined earlier. We and the other 4 campus unions will be on the employer's case at every single stage, every negotiation meeting, every follow-up after every negotiation meeting, to make sure that there is no backsliding on their part. And the same, I know, will be the case in the USS dispute. We are not demonstrating blind faith here. We're not just crossing our fingers and hoping that things will turn out well for us. We are working to ensure that real progress is made, as we have managed so far in the ACAS negotiations that have got us as far as we are today. But one more point, and this is important, and that's the fact that we're running the reballots. Those reballot results, which we will win, I am sure, will keep the employer's side feet to the fire. If, come September, in the USS dispute, the employers try on any shenanigans, they try and renege on any commitments they're giving us at this point, we will be in a position to call action to hit Freshers' Week and the beginning of the academic year. And the same is true in our pay dispute. Moreover, we have proven to the employers that we can win national ballots. And if they doubt it again, that will be very unwise, because the evidence is there. So we've done it now and we can do it again. We owe it to ourselves, all our members, our students, and those coming into the profession in higher education, to make as best a go of this as we can, to try to negotiate real, meaningful, new agreements, frameworks and principles that all our members and our future members need to change the higher education sector for good. And we'll do that with some of those negotiations on workload and casualisation running through to spring next year. But actually, the better news is that the negotiations on pay equality gaps are going to match the review of the pay spine. So we're actually hoping that those talks will be over by October this year, not next year.
Can I just interrupt quickly, actually, because it's a funny one, this, isn't it? You know, will we ever fully trust the employers? Like, no. That's why trade unions exist. No, we don't. But we are in one hell of a position here. not only the things that Greg rightly points out, but also, we can win a national ballot at any point. We did it in the summer when nobody was in work. People were in work, but people weren't in campus or sometimes at home. No more fighting our employers university by university, no more letting them pick us off. They come for one, they come for all. We are confident this is different, but we're not complacent. I don't want anyone listening thinking that. We will monitor the progress of this agreement if the members in the union endorse it, but we're not going to hang about if there's any breaches of it. We bank and build. That's the motto.
Cheers, Jo. Just on that, you said earlier on pay that we haven't moved the employer, but surely by banking and building, our UCU Rising campaign did improve the employer's offer.
Yeah, the offer on the table now is an improvement from the one that they made at the beginning of the dispute. It is a significant improvement.
And before we balloted, there wasn't a pay offer on the table at all, surely?
I'd have to ask Justine for that one. But no, the point you're making, Nathan, is the offer that we have now, whether it's the pay percentage or anything, is a bank and build and is an incremental improvement all the time. So yes, you are right to pull me up on that. There have been marginal improvements to that pay offer through ACAS. So yeah, you are right. All of this is building and is improvement.
Let's stay on that. Yeah. Some members are going to say that it isn't enough and that an effective programme of strike action is going to get us more, particularly when we win that reballot. So, Jo, can you just please, again, tell us your position on pay in isolation and as part of the wider agreement?
Yeah, that's fair enough. Look, the employer, as part of the wider agreement, have never really wanted to properly move into a negotiated space in the way that we would find acceptable on those three non-pay issues. They've constantly tried to squirm out of establishing meaningful national negotiations on insecurity, on workload, and equality pay gaps. It is UCU's dedication across the board, but particularly members' dedication, that's ensured that we are now in this position. If we settle this dispute and move into this kind of uncharted period of negotiation that could be ahead of us, we will be at the beginning of a journey that will change working in higher education. And fundamentally, will change it for the better. Not just having pockets, whether it's the Open University or elsewhere, where people benefit from anti-casualisation agreements. Making sure that everyone everywhere is pushing on that. Reducing workloads hopefully back to something that those of us who've worked in the sector for a while remember. And importantly, prioritising the removal of pay gaps, that often overlap in intersectional ways. We know that for those that are already marginalised in higher education. And I'm not really going to shy away from celebrating that as progress. It is progress, and it's where a lot of us have wanted to get to. I think it is big. It is bucking a trend that we see all across the UK, particularly on 0-hour contracts. And, it's down to UCU members saying we're not going to give up on each other and we're not going to give up on the sector. Now, back to pay in isolation. Yeah, all right, it's budged since before the dispute and it's budged since December. But since the offer that was made, last month, it hasn't moved, and there's no talking around that. And, if you're listening to this and your primary concern in this dispute is pay and not the other things, then you're probably not going to be happy. But I don't think the majority of UCU members will see this rounded agreement and think that this doesn't represent a gain in several areas and understand the need to bank and build. For me, making sure colleagues have a job and they're not, on several fractional or fixed term contracts, making sure we get our weekends back, making sure our Black, disabled and women members get paid fairly. These things, they matter. In the case of pay gaps, these things will deliver more pay to marginalised staff in a way that a flat rate pay increase won't. I've been saying for a while now, our employers need to make us a rounded offer, one that allows us to see how the sector could be rebuilt. how staff could begin to enjoy working in it again. I think we have that. Ultimately, though, it's not what I think, it's what UCU members think that matters. UCU members voted to launch a pay and pension ballot. UCU members voted in very large numbers, bigger than we've seen since the introduction of those anti-ballot laws, to take strike action. And it'll be UCU members who vote to either reject or accept any offers in these disputes. For what it's worth, I think the proposals on the table in both disputes should be put out for members to vote on. This dispute has had way more democratic involvement of members than any other. And I really believe if you've been on a picket line, if you've been losing pay, you deserve to have the right to say what you think in this dispute, whether that is to reject it or accept it. I think with regards, pay and would more action push them further on pay? I can't remember if that's exactly what you asked, Nathan, but I think it was. My point would be, in disputes, you have to use the leverage that you have. And you have to decide when it is best to cash out and when it is best to keep going. I keep mentioning that there are 4 other unions in this dispute with us. We are the only one that has a national ballot. Our leverage here is doing pretty much all of the heavy lifting in the pay dispute. And if the membership decides pursuing a higher percentage of pay is what they want to do, and they want to take strike action to do it, and they want to have a marking and assessment boycott, well, we've got one, and it's scheduled to commence on April the 17th. And I've been clear from day one, I will back that. I will, be in the media as you've seen me before. I will be on picket lines. We will back that strategy if that is what members want, because it is their dispute.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that, Jo. Justine, can you please talk us through the time-limited negotiations element of this agreement? Is this just the employer putting things into the long grass?
No, I appreciate that it could be interpreted that way, but no, it really isn't. And that's why the negotiations are very deliberately time limited. For anyone listening who's negotiated local workload agreements or anti-casualisation agreements, you'll know that these typically take years, not months. The offer that shifted 4,800 Open University staff onto permanent contracts took 3 years of negotiations. The deal Bath have just agreed locally took 5 years. The gender pay deal that Bristol negotiated again took over a year. We're seeking to take something as complex as the UK higher education sector, with all the variance that exists across 150 institutions, the good practice that does exist here and there, along with the bad practice that we see all too regularly, and provide outputs from these negotiations that will stand the test of time and that will importantly deliver to our branches workable tools, outputs and frameworks that they can use to change their institution and grow their branch. So this isn't kicking it into the long grass, quite the opposite. This is the process we need as a union operating at a UK level to ensure that we get what we need and what we deserve.
Thank you for that, Justine. Greg, can I come back to you quickly? I want to talk about involuntary 0 hours contracts. Is it a serious commitment from the employer to end them, or is it something the Vice Chancellors can simply dodge? How many members, if they were ended, would it help?
Thanks, Nathan. This is serious. It is a serious prospect, and it's a very significant one. It'll be thousands of staff across the sector who will be affected. It's difficult to actually put a precise number on it because the use of 0 hours contracts by its very nature sort of varies almost month by month sometimes, but it will certainly be thousands. And really importantly, we've seen evidence that this can be done. We have seen one employer in the shape of Sheffield Hallam University commit to removing 0 hours contracts very recently. This puts the lie to any argument that the HE sector needs 0 hours contracts. They don't. The sector doesn't need them. The employers don't need them. But we need many other employers, many other institutions to clean up their act like Sheffield Hallam are doing so. We still have dozens of institutions that have significant numbers of lecturing staff employed on 0 hour contracts. Removing these is an important first step in UCU on behalf of the employers, showing us that they are serious. It will positively impact people, and it will do so in several ways, not least because it will immediately deliver greater job security to those people, those thousands of people currently on those sorts of contracts. It will deliver a reliability and predictability of income for those HE staff. And for institutions and for those students that those staff work with, it will deliver greater consistency in provision. So students will know who their staff, who to expect, in the seminar next term and the term after, in a way that they don't at the moment. And that is something that students and the NUS have been asking for a while.
Okay, sorry, can you just explain to me what involuntary means? Because presumably no one wants to be on a 0 hours contract.
Yeah, good point. I mean, UCU have made the point to us in the ACAS negotiations repeatedly that there are many, hundreds, possibly thousands of people out there in the sector who actually like these contracts, and how it would be really, really outrageous for employers to deny them the pleasure of working on these contracts. Well, we've said to them, well, if that's the case, if people actually want these contracts and they're asking for them, then employers can use them. What they can't do is offer them on an involuntary basis, so force people to take the contracts. And if UCU have agreed in principle that they're not needed in the sector, but they're wanted, there are all these people out there who want them. And we've said, fine, if they want them, give them, but don't force anyone to take them on an involuntary basis. That's what we've said. That's where we've pushed UCU, and they've had to acknowledge that point of principle. And VCs can't dodge this anymore, and they won't dodge it. We will undertake a review of this process with UCU. We will keep an eye on what's happening as we move through the detailed negotiations over the other areas of casualisation. We will keep an eagle eye on this. And if any employers try and dodge it, if any VCs try and dodge it, we will be on their case.
Fantastic. Thanks, Greg. That sounds like a real marker in the sand. Talking of wins, Jo, if I can come back to you, USS pensions. Now, I know on occasion that we at UCU have been accused of being a tad bombastic with how we've communicated our victories. But I don't think that many could have foreseen the scale of what our members are achieving here. From my knowledge, no other union has achieved this type of reversal. Have we made history?
Yes, this is historic, and I think that needs to be calmly, rather than in a bombastic manner, Nathan, stated. In pension disputes, changes happen traditionally in one direction. Pensions are cut, pension schemes are downgraded, and we're told that happens because valuations and numbers mean it needs to. But we never see it go in reverse when the numbers suggest it can. So this is historic. Now, having the value, unfairly taken from our pensions, getting that back is the least we deserve, but that doesn't mean getting it back is any less remarkable. Other unions have tried, but not got to where we are. As I say, there is usually one trajectory in pension disputes, cuts and scheme downgrades. The proposal on the table here is to restore our pension and lower contributions, and that should be recognised for what it is. It is groundbreaking. But we also need to recognise it for what it is. Absolutely could not be achieved without members backing, a set of tactics that are new. But importantly, since 2011, absolutely never giving up. As has been said a few times now, nothing is final. We won't have a sense of finality until September. But if UCU members invest the same levels of energy, effort, passion, dedication that has kept, us going through these disputes to this reballot, to pressure in their branches locally to their vice-chancellors and principals, we will deliver the restoration of our pension, and I think we will get the scheme back on a better footing. We do need to establish a better valuation process. The employer agrees with us on that. We need to avoid these triennial disputes where we all have go into an absolute panic about whether or not our retirement income is going to stand the test of time. And, hopefully we can reset industrial relations, work with the employer to lobby the government to change the way in which, they regulate multi-covenant schemes like ours. But yes, this is a huge victory for UCU members. It's a huge victory for our retired members who, aren't striking with us anymore, but have been with us in every dispute. And, it's powerful for the rest of the trade union movement, who will look at what we've achieved and demand the same.
Great, thanks, Jo. So whatever way you look at it, however you slice it, that sounds pretty momentous. Justine, if I can come to you now. We're big fans of acronyms at UCU, and I'm sure the average member probably doesn't know what a BDM is, who the HEC are. So could you please take us through what the next steps will be now that we've got an agreement with the negotiators? Can you set that out in clear terms for the average member?
Okay, very good question, Nathan. So a BDM, so that's a branch delegate meeting, and HEC is the Higher Education Committee. Now, the branch delegate meeting brings together every branch in the dispute and asks them to report feedback from their branch members about how they want any aspect of the dispute to be managed at any particular moment. And there have been numerous BDMs already this dispute, and they are effective at relaying branch feedback to the Higher Education Committee. Now, the HEC is an elected body, and essentially they're the group that make all the key decisions about disputes in our union. When to call ballots, when to call action, what types of ballots, what types of action. You elect them once every year, and we just had the election results for next year's HEC recently. There's a roughly 40 people in this group. And with regard to next steps, all UCU branches are being asked to survey their members and establish what members want the next steps to be. For example, do they want the opportunity to vote on these proposals from the employers? Do they want to continue action, or do they want to pause it? Do they want the proposals to be voted on together? So that's both pay and pay related and pensions. Branches will then relay these views to a branch delegate meeting. The results of the BDM will then be presented to the HEC, who will use that to make their decision as to what happens next. Now, this is going to have to be a rapid process. In order to make sure all members get an opportunity to have their voice heard, we're also launching an all-member survey. Please make sure you're checking your emails, as this is how it will get to you. Check your junk too. Some universities send UCU surveys there, and check in with your branch to feed into the local feedback process they have. It's really important that every single member makes their voice heard. Nothing will happen without you. This is your union, but the next steps as stipulated by the union's democratic procedures are member engagement, a branch delegate meeting, followed by a meeting of the Higher Education Committee. The HEC will ultimately decide what happens and how feedback from branches is interpreted.
Thanks for taking us through that process with us, Justine. Greg, if I can come back to you, you were in the negotiations, obviously. Some members may well be listening to this and think that we could have got more with further strikes. Do you think that we've got the employers as far as we can?
I'll let Justine pick up that point with regard to USS specifically, as I haven't been involved in those talks. What I have been involved in is the talks with ACAS around pay and the pay-related elements. And what I will say about those issues is that the employer has indeed moved, the employer side has moved to a space where they've never been before, ever. In recent history at the normal Jinches negotiating meetings, they have not, as Jo said earlier, they have not been prepared to engage in meaningful negotiations, around, particularly around the pay-related elements. We've been trying to get them there, we've been trying to get them into that space for years now, but we haven't managed it. Finally, we have. We have got them to sign up to negotiations where we will be able to nail them down on details. And we've got a big ticket concession up front in the form of the ending of 0 hours contracts. Also, the establishment of a review of the national pay spine. We've been after that for ages, and we've got a commitment to meaningful action to reduce gender, ethnicity and disability pay gaps. All of those things are really significant. We moved them on pay before we got to ACAS, and we've moved them a tiny bit since. If UCU members decide as a whole that this isn't enough, then we'll continue with the action. But for what it's worth, my view is that the action we've taken to shift them to where they are now means that this is now a really good time to stop the action, to end the dispute and enter into meaningful negotiations to achieve the real changes that we have wanted and needed for years, and we now have an opportunity to try and get those through these negotiations. I think UCU members should be immensely proud of what they've achieved. We need to note, though, that out of the 5 campus unions, we are the only ones with national aggregate ballot mandates. Our density across the sector is somewhere around about 30%. So the question is, some people may be asking themselves, can that sector afford more than what's currently on the table for pay? Yeah, overall it could. We've said we know the amount of money that's there in the sector, but we ought to note that it's not evenly distributed. And as Jo said earlier, there are issues around student numbers and competition between institutions that need to be addressed there as well. But the other question is not just about affordability. The question is, could we collectively as campus unions force the employers' side to offer up more pay? And I have to be honest, I have to say I'm not sure about that one at all. I'd like to see all 5 unions with national aggregate ballot results. I think we really could shift them and we could coordinate together in future. And maybe that's something we'll achieve in future pay rounds. But right now, UCU is bringing the most leverage to the negotiating table. And I know, because I've been there, that we have made really significant progress in those ACAS talks. And I think we've done well, and I think we need to bank that now, because if we keep on taking action, the pain of that action will fall disproportionately on UCU members.
Thank you for setting that out for us, Greg. Jo, if I can come back to you quickly, I want to go back to the pause. Some members were understandably upset with the lack of notice they received. Could you address that? And secondly, do you think on reflection that the pause gave us the space we needed to deliver the agreement that we've got, or was it an error that allowed the employer to have the upper hand?
Okay, I'll take the issue of the timing of it first. We completely accept, and I think it was made clear by a number of UCU members on the evening that the pause was announced, that this was, late on a Friday, that for people who commute, who often, because sometimes are casualised members because they've got several jobs across several cities, or for people with childcare, it was really inconvenient, that there was costs associated with it. And I completely understand the criticism that came from those constituencies. For what it's worth, we really did not want to tell people so late on a Friday. We had been doing our best throughout that entire week to get negotiations to a point where we were going to be able to involve more people in that discussion before any pause was made. But as people have probably picked up from listening to this podcast, we have a lot of people in those negotiations with us, 4 other unions and an employer that was taking its time. So the timing of being so late on a Friday was really unavoidable. I am really sorry to people who were massively inconvenienced by it or left out of pocket. But one of the other things that I've, said during this dispute is we would look after people's yes votes. That people don't need to be on pickets losing money if that isn't necessary. And we genuinely thought at the time that standing down action and allowing for a period of calm in both disputes was the best thing for negotiations. And I have to say, I stand by that. It was hugely beneficial. It gave us the space to make the progress that's been outlined so far. We would not have got to this point in either negotiations without that positive environment. So I know the timing of it was not great, but it was unavoidable. The other thing I would say with regards to the USS dispute in particular, I think the pause really did allow some USS employers to sort of come out of the shadows, to make in public the types of statements that we know that they were making in private. It allowed for the development of what is a set of proposals that are going to restore pensions, secure long-term sustainability of USS. So I definitely think the pause was worth it in USS. In pay, the pause allowed for ACAS. And I think Justine touched on this earlier, but the facilitators at ACAS were really, really good. They've allowed all sides to sort of break free from what was becoming, I think, a bit of a merry-go-round of disagreeing about things, particularly pay, to talk, and this is the important thing, to talk meaningfully about the three non-pay aspects of our dispute, which I think people listening will agree really need urgent negotiation to progress. So it's allowed us to develop the set of proposals that I spent, the first 20 minutes of this podcast talking about. But more than that, it financially benefited members because it lowered the amount of days they were on strike and getting strike pay deductions. I was on the road all last week. It allowed us to keep vital support from our students. I heard from one SU president. He said that the pause really helped him to convincingly argue to students and keep them on side. And I've heard countless other examples of this. And ultimately, UCU members will have their say on the proposals that we've discussed on pay and pensions. But the fact we are here discussing them is because we created the best environment possible, and the pause helped that.
Thanks, Jo. I'm going to come right back at you if that's okay. Why can't we take the elements of the agreement that we like, pensions, the action on equality pay gaps, ending 0 hours contracts, all that good stuff, and still be in dispute on pay?
That is a very good question. Basically pick and mix, Nathan.
Yeah.
The pay proposals, they stand as a package. Members will have to look at what is being offered as a whole and really decide if sufficient progress has been made in the whole across all four fights. For them to say, now is the time we take our chips off the table, we stand down action, or alternatively say that isn't enough and now is the time to accelerate to the marking and assessment boycott and more strike action. That's the choice in front of them. This is a dispute about four fights, and it is a package that people are being asked to take a view on. For members in institution in both disputes, obviously there's going to be a larger consideration that they take, the decision about pay alongside the decision about pensions. In both disputes, the proposals, and this is really important for people to understand, in both disputes, the proposals being made by employers, assuming members vote to accept them, are dependent on strike action being stood down. Again, for members in institutions in both disputes, employers are seeking to resolve both and have action stood down in both. And the reality for us as a union, as union members, we came into this dispute looking to deliver a settlement on both issues. We believe this is a set of agreements, that would achieve, or rather a set of proposals, that would achieve this goal, and that we should bank it and build. But, we also have national ballots. We don't want to return to an era of only USS universities taking strike action, or just a pay dispute. The strength that we have built is based on how we have coordinated this campaign from day one. So this isn't about a pick and mix of the bits we like and the bits we don't like. Coordinated campaign from day one, 70,000 at the beginning, 70,000 at the end. And I think that's how we're looking at resolving these disputes. And now is the time, we believe, to really bank what has been, particularly in pensions, significant progress and serious progress in pay, and build the union to an even stronger level than ever before.
All right, thanks, Jo. I think we've been going for quite a while now, and we've discussed quite a few topics. So I'd like to try and start bringing it to a close, this podcast. I'd like to give you all a chance to deliver your final message to members. Why is where we are a victory? Why they should reply to the e-ballot, and anything else you want to add.
Okay, so certainly on USS it is a victory because we are looking at full restoration of the benefits that were cut. I think with respect to pay and pay related, it is a victory. We are talking about pay related in a meaningful way that certainly has not been my experience previously. But these are partial victories, which is why the reballot is so important, because we know that the employers can renege very, very easily on these commitments, and that's why the reballot, voting yes in the reballot, is so important. And the last thing I want to say is it has been an absolute privilege to represent the union in the negotiations. Anything that we win, any victory, it's down to you, the members. I salute you. Thank you for your support. We have so felt it in the room.
Thank you, Justine. Greg?
Thanks, Nathan. Yeah, I'd echo that final point from Justine. And I would say on the pay and pay related matters, which are the negotiations I've been involved in, this is a clear victory. It's a victory because we've pushed the employers, as we said earlier, into a position they didn't want to be in and that they've refused to go to year on year on year. Okay, it's an interim victory because we haven't actually thrashed out the details and finished the negotiations. But to get their clear commitment to meaningful, time-limited negotiations is a victory. We've not achieved that for years. That is within grasp now. And if members back it, we will go into those negotiations with every ounce of determination to deliver the detailed, full and final victory on these pay-related matters that our members deserve. And as Justine said, it's our members' action that has got us this far. It's winning the reballot that will keep up the pressure and give us the strongest hand in those negotiations.
That was brilliant. Thanks, Greg. Can we go over to you, Jo, for your final message?
Yeah, I really want to start with a thank you to our members, our reps, branches, senior officials, staff, you, Nathan, for your good work tonight. You've all done an incredible job. And I want to say now, and this is, not a moment for dramatic language. It's a moment to reflect on where we are now, but also where we were. I believe that if any member does that, then they're going to see that we've made considerable progress. 12 months ago, we were fractured. Right now, we're on the brink of winning our second national ballot, restoring stolen pensions. Not just securing a pay award, but delivering significant movement on precarity. We did that. You did that. This isn't utopia. No one here is saying that. But it is further than we have ever got before. On pensions, it's more than any other union has ever got before. I look forward to speaking to members, engaging with branches, the higher education committee that is coming. But really, members get the final say. This is your dispute. So keep supporting the action, keep voting. And, I hope, like me, you are UCU. I'm really, really proud of your union.
Thank you, Jo. And thanks to all of the panel today. You've done a really good job explaining, I think, what's quite dense information to someone like me who wouldn't probably otherwise be able to understand it. So I'm sure that every member listening to this is now quite much more able to grasp these issues. Thank you to every member who has listened to this, not only for tuning in, but for your outstanding support throughout the whole of these disputes, which has got us to this point. As I said earlier, please share this podcast, watch our videos, read the transcript, use your e-vote, join branch meetings, and be proud. Today we're closer than ever to delivering change in our sector, and that's because of you. We'll catch you all soon.